Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Vang. If a Minnesotan writes an article claiming or arguing that COVID-19 is a Chinese bioweapon that leaked from a lab in Wuhan, and someone reports that article to the Department of Human Rights, is that something that the Department of Human Rights should put in their bias registry under your bill?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Niska, not all incidents are considered, I guess, violent or criminal, as I said before. And so this clearly, if with the rhetoric that we have seen since the pandemic and regarding accusing Asians of bringing in the coronavirus, that is bias motivated. And so that can be considered a bias incident.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think I heard yes to that, which is very troubling to me, that someone making a factual argument along those lines, I think is something that's within political discourse would be included in the Department of Human Rights database. Let me ask you another question, though, if Representative Vang would yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Vang, if a Minnesotan is wearing a T-shirt that says, "I love J.K. Rowling," and someone sees that and reports them to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as an example of gender identity or gender expression bias, is that something that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights should put in this bias database?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Niska. I think this question will best be answered by the lawyers. I'm not a lawyer myself. I think in the language of the provision, we have looked at the language to make sure that a substantial part of any incident has to be relating to bias and hate and motivated. And so I will, I'm not going to say a yes or no to that question. It is really up to the those investigating to decide whether there is substances on bias and hate incidents.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and that's a pretty shocking answer that you aren't able to say that someone wearing a J.K. Rowling T-shirt being reported to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights for gender identity or gender expression bias would not, under your bill, that the Department of Human Rights would not put that into their bias database. How about another example, if Representative Vang will yield?
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Vang. And again, I'm asking you not as a lawyer, but as the author of this language and to understand what your intent is about how the Minnesota Department of Human Rights will exercise the discretion that you're giving them in your bill. If a Minnesotan argues that there are two specific Christian colleges that should be excluded from the PSEO program, and someone hears that and reports that argument to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as a bias incident motivated by religion, is that something that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights should include or exclude from their biased registry?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Niska. I think faith and religion is part of a protected class, and that is something that the Department of Human Rights can look at.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That sounded like a yes to me. That's an opinion that I very strongly disagree with, but it is absolutely not an opinion that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights should be putting in a speech registry. How about this, if another example, if Representative Vang will yield?
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If a Minnesotan is in a video and says that they believe that, in fact, white kids should feel bad about American history, and a parent sees that and reports that to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as an example of race bias, is that something that should go into the bias registry, or should the Department of Human Rights set that aside?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Niska, as coming from a marginalized community, I think it might be hard for you to understand what it's like to feel othered and like an outcast, and to feel
Madam Speaker,
like
point of order.
Representative Niska.
Madam Speaker, personalities.
Representative Niska, she's nowhere close to that. Representative Vang, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. as I said, coming from a community that's been historically marginalized, abused, and have a history of persecution, I think it's hard to describe the feeling of what it means to be unsafe to someone who has half the privilege of being safe. And so I would just
Madam
leave
Speaker,
it at—
point of order.
Representative New Brindley, state your point of order.
Under 1.24, we are not allowed to engage in personalities or motives on the floor.
Representatives Niska and New Brindley, Representative Vang is speaking about her personal experience.
And
Representative,
she is assuming that other members do not have that experience.
Representative New Brindley, you are out of order. Representative Vang, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll just keep this brief. I will just say that as a community member who has seen in the past previous years the rise of hate incidents against me and my own members of the community, I think it's very important that we continue to make sure that hate has no place in anywhere in Minnesota, in any corner of the state. So I will just leave it at that, and I will not yield for further questions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And Madam Speaker, the Representative Vang was speaking about me personally. Perhaps you didn't hear, but she did. Members, what we heard from Representative Vang, however, is 1984. It is a speech registry in which the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, unelected bureaucrats at the Department of Human Rights, are going to collect certain political opinions that they do and do not agree with. And if government employees can try to silence and threaten a powerful member of the Capitol Press Corps, think about what they're going to do to people who have political opinions that they don't like, who they assume have had certain experiences and have not had certain experiences, who they assume are members of a powerful class or not. That is exactly what the bias registry in this bill does. And the fix to that is really pretty simple, which is we're going to make sure that when we talk about bias, when we look at trying to collect information about bias, that we look at collecting crimes about bias, which is what current law does and what my amendment tries to enhance by making sure that the Department of Human Rights certainly can take information from community groups and can pass it to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension if it involves a criminal incident. But the Minnesota Department of Human Rights does not get to have surveillance about political views that they do and do not disagree with. The fact of the matter is, Representative Vang and the Department of Human Rights are going to have the same trouble distinguishing what is a legitimate and what is not a legitimate view when someone comes to them and says that they are being targeted by bias. There are people who, folks on that side of the aisle, don't think are oppressed or have a reason to feel oppressed, but they do feel threatened. And they will go to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights if we leave that door open. And this is not going to just go one way. If you assume that you are always going to control the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, you're always going to control the government, then yes, it's very easy to think about the government surveilling your political opponents. But we should be very, very careful about government surveillance and government collection of data about speech. The amendment is very simple. The amendment is very simple. It's a very easy fix. It makes sure that what we're looking at, collecting, are criminal acts, and we're trying to make sure that we enhance the ability to collect that as much as possible. But what we are not going to collect under the amendment is speech. This underlying bill that I'm trying to fix is a very, very dangerous intrusion by the government out into the marketplace of ideas, surveilling people's speech, looking at ideas, political opinions that the government bureaucrats in this case don't agree with.